Hey everyone, welcome to the Way Champions podcast. This is your host, John O'Sullivan. So excited to be here with you today. So excited to be back on the podcast with my good friend, JP Nerbun, to discuss his brand new book. JP is a best-selling author, leadership coach, founder of TOC Culture Consulting, and just an all-around great guy. Tons of coaching experience, tons of playing experience, and tons of one-on-one coaching and team consulting and everything. He's worked across sports and education, healthcare, business. He's worked with institutions like Stanford and Harvard, University of Texas, USGA, Chick-Fil-A. This is his third book. We've had him on the podcast after everyone. His first one in 2019 was called Calling Up, Discovering Your Journey to Transformational Leadership. And in 2022, he was back on with the Culture System, which was about basically a framework for developing team culture. And in 2023, he sort of launched an online program. And his podcast, where I have also been a guest and Jerry's been a guest, is called Coaching Culture with Nate Sanderson. And it's one of the top, sport and leadership podcasts out there. His website is TOC Culture. So TOC, then the word culture.com, two C's in a row there. And we're going to talk about his new book here today. We're going to talk about making parents your partner in this and not your adversary. We're going to talk about how we need to start within, right? That this great partnership is about knowing ourselves first, and then not seeing parents as seeing them as people, and so much more. So get ready, because this is obviously, as a coach, as a parent, understanding that this partnership is probably the key to our kids having a successful sports experience. Is one of the most important things we can do. Okay. Now, before we jump in, I just give you all a reminder. If you want to get some bulk orders in for Every Moment Matters or the Champion Teammate, get those in soon, because as the closer you get to the holidays, the longer the bulk printer takes. And so, especially if you want to use these for a holiday gift, do those now. And the best way to do that is just email me, John, JOHN, at changingthegameproject.com. We'll give you a really nice discount on the books if you order them directly through us. And it's a great gift for your team, for your coaching staff, or whomever you like, or your parents, right? So that. And then also, thanks to our amazing Patreon podcast champions. You all are the best. If you want to become a supporter of this podcast, get a couple $100 of our online courses for free, some PDFs of our books for free, all that sort of stuff. Just go to patreon.com/way champions. And it helps us put this podcast out every week and bring it to you for free. Okay. So get ready, everyone. Get set. The book is The Sports Parent Solution: Proven Strategies for Transforming Parents from Obstacles to Allies. And we're here with the author, JP Nerbun. Enjoy, everyone. JP, welcome back to the Way Champions. It's awesome to have you back on, man.
Yeah, man, it's you're really gracious for bringing me back on all these times. So I must not have screwed up too much in the past.
Well, your books are really good. So I always enjoy reading them, and I learn from them, and they're thought-provoking in so many ways. And the work that you do with teams and coaches is certainly inspiring to us. So when you have new ideas, we want to hear about them, and I think our listeners do too. So this is great. I was thinking about where to start, but this book is about sort of shifting our mindset to as coaches with how we work with parents, right? And stop dealing with parents and engage them. You tell a story in your intro to the book about Steven Spielberg and the movie Jaws, and the idea of shifting the mindset. Tell that story, because I was chuckling when I read that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, you talk about sports parents and talk about sharks in the same story, but that's often probably times how coaches feel, is just this fear. But yeah, Spielberg wasn't a, before he really made it big, he had taken on Jaws, which became his breakthrough film for those that know that, and huge blockbuster success. But before it was a blockbuster success, it was on its road to failure. They were months into shooting and it was over budget and well over time. The reason being the mechanical shark for the film that they had spent all this money and pumped all this money in to, be the feature of the film, kept breaking down. And so they would lose whole days of shooting and it was just an absolute disaster. And so Spielberg's like careers on the line
Hmm.
here and on this film. And so he takes a step back and he says, you know, what would Alfred Hitchcock do in this situation? And he's like, he'd film a movie with pretty much no shark. And so that's what he did. And if you've seen Jaws, the power of the film is in the fact that you can't see it, but it's just this, is it in the water type of thing. That's what makes it scary, which definitely connects to anybody that's been in the ocean. You know, is that fear is like you can't see down what's underneath in the water there. So it was his shift in mindset that was the breakthrough for him, right? So he thought his problem was this shark that was breaking, but when he shifted his mindset to no, it's actually the solution is making a film without a shark, right? It changed everything for him. And
Hmm.
I had first heard of that in a book called by David Niven called "It's Not About the Shark." And when I read that, I was like, oh man, this is sports parents. Like we think they're the problem. We
Hmm.
think they're the thing that's destroying our culture. And just like Steven Spielberg, that mechanical shark, yeah, it is causing all these problems, right? But our real problem is our thinking of the problem. And so if we could change our thinking about parents, it will unlock actually one of the most powerful things that we can do within our culture.
Yeah. And I think it's a great story because it's the unseen thing that we fear, right? And what, fear the false evidence appearing real, right? And so we're always like, when that text comes in at 11 p.m. or we open our email in the morning, right? Like I always ask athletic directors, finish this sentence, parents are dot, 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 right? And it's like, however you finish that sentence is likely how you approach every time you open your email, every phone call, every meeting, right? And if your attitude is parents are there, are your greatest allies, you know, you're going to approach it differently than parents are your biggest nightmare.
Well, that's the funny thing is like, there's that fear, even just like you walk into a practice and you see the parents and, maybe that parent doesn't look at you the right way. And it could be completely the fact that they just had a tough day and have nothing to do with you. But all of a sudden, Johnny's parents look at you the wrong way. And all of a sudden your head goes to, are they unhappy? Did I do something? Is it because he didn't play, in the final minutes of the game last week? Our head goes, we go to these places and we create these stories. And hey, honestly, we've got some evidence to somewhat back up these stories. We've all had these parent moments from hell, right? That just absolutely rock us or almost somewhat traumatic, to then experience. There's just so much of these crazy sports parents that are maybe probably tainting the water for all the other well-intentioned parents that are just trying to support their kid.
Yeah, you share a story in the beginning of the book about sort of your moment that almost made you walk away from coaching. You want to share that? Because I think it's just
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could read that and not relate to it.
Yeah. I mean, there's this crazy moment. I actually shared part of the story at the end of my last book, The Culture System, right? So the story goes like, I'm fully committed to transformational coaching. I'm more intentional than I've ever been. I'm really pouring into my athletes. And yet I'm getting some resistance still from parents. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm
Mhm.
really caring about the kids. I'm not yelling or screaming or, using some of this old school coaching. And yet, we had a tough season. We weren't winning as many games as I thought we would have and others thought. And, but there's this moment I disciplined this one player on my team, and it was a normal discipline situation that year. It was done in a way that was respectful and we had similar issues like this before, but all of a sudden I'm driving out of the parking lot of my school and a parent tries to swerves his car in front of me and gets out of the car. So I'm like pulling off the side of the road, like nearly runs me off the road. It gets in my face and he's chewing me out and telling me I'm crazy and telling me I just need to quit and leave the team. Right. So fast forward, there's two really important parts about the story. Fast forward a few weeks. And what I learned is that parent was just laid off from his job a few weeks prior. was going through his divorce, and his son, who he was there to defend, hadn't talked to him in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Son said, "My dad's just a loser."
Mm.
That was what he told me. So here's this man going through a really rough time in my life, or his life.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it caused me a lot of pain, but it's just to remember, like, there's a human element to parents. Now, let's fast forward 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now I publish the culture system. I write this chapter, the conclusion around how hard parent coaching can be,
Mm-hmm.
all about this dad. And completely out of the blue, the book's published 2 weeks later, unrelated because he didn't read the book. I know that. He sends me this long text and
Mm-hmm.
he says, essentially, it's, "Coach, I just want to thank you. When I'm with friends and we talk about our kids' sporting experience, I always say the best coach my son had was Coach Nerbun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because not only did you discipline him in a way and care about him in a way that was respectful and challenged him," he says, "I watched the way that you coached and I learned how to be a better parent for him as a father of a teenager. There's a lot of things that I wouldn't have done as a father had I not had your example." And that blew my mind, because mindset shift years ago was, "Oh, parents are human." Now I
Mm-hmm.
have this whole thing of like, I actually impact parents. Like, parents are not just,
Mm-hmm.
they're watching how I lead, how I interact, how I discipline. And if I do that in an effective manner, some parents are actually growing from that experience, from my example. And that was a huge shift for me.
Yeah. And it's a great story because I think everyone who listens to this podcast could share a story of the 2 a.m. email or the irate parents storming over. Right. I remember, it was funny, I lived in Oregon 17 years. And I remember when I first moved here, right. And I'd been a Division I college coach, and I'd been and then ran a club in Michigan. And I moved here to Oregon. And the first game I'm coaching is like, you know, under 13 boys, and we lose the game, and the game ends, and I have the kids do a cool down jog across across and back. And then they come and they come back, and they were starting to stretch, and this mom comes storming across the field, and she's like, "How dare you punish these boys for losing a game? Who do you think you are?" And I was like, "Are you talking to me? Like, we're stretching." And this poor kid is like, "Mom, get out of here. What are you doing?" And I was just like, "Whoa, that was nuts," and it's just, but probably a similar thing. Family just recently got divorced. Mom is stressed out, bad relationship with her kid, can't help but keep embarrassing him for a cool down run, right? And this is the thing is, so our mutual friend Sky Eddie, always says, like, we can't let the small percentage of bad parents ruin our relationship with all the good ones, because I think most of them are great. You agree?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think the thing too is, I mean, we've all been, as most of us become parents, we recognize it's really a hard job. It's not our only job. We've also got all the other stresses of life, right? And we're all struggling. We're all imperfect as parents, and we all have our worst days. Some bad days in there. And you put sports into it where we're really emotionally attached, and we're investing as parents lots of time and money into this sporting experience. And we want to see our kids do well. And you know what? We all screw up at certain points down the path. I mean, we've all got so many stories. I've had parents come into the locker room afterwards crying about their son's playing time. I'm literally crying in tears, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something going on, and it's not necessarily a reflection of my coaching. It's more a reflection of what's going on for that person and what they struggle with, right? But we take it so personally, and I get why we do, because we pour so much into it, and so that's where we want to build these walls, because we're just like, I can't handle this, right? I can't take, on all these parent issues and parent problems. I just want to coach. I just care about the kids. And what I've recognized is, if we really care about the kids and we really want to create a great experience for them, we really want the team experience to be unique and powerful, where everybody's pulling together. If we want those things and we really want to help the kid develop and grow, then we've got to recognize that we've got to engage the parents. And in fact, if we really want to help develop character and shape our athletes, we're really partnering with the parents, because the parent is the most influential person in the kid's life.
Mm-hmm.
They're the most influential. And so if we can partner with them, we can deepen our influence and impact.
Yeah. Did you change as a coach when you became a parent?
Absolutely. There's these massive moments where even now, I think there's that initial moment where you have your first child, and I don't think it fully sets in at first though, right? I don't think it's only once they start to get a little bit older. And that's where it's really happened for me recently as my daughter's come up there, as I've started to see myself on the sideline as a parent, and I started to get a little animated, or internally I'm bottling it all up and I'm like, or you get in the
Yeah.
car and you want to, you're so excited about how well they played, or they don't play well, and you feel this, you sense this urge to say something, and you're like,
Hmm.
oh man, if I wasn't so aware, if I didn't live in this every day, I know how easily I could give into this. I mean, I was even the other day out with my son and we were hitting around, and he wasn't holding. I live in Ireland where they have the sport hurling. It's the
Hmm.
opposite. The way you hold a hurley stick is opposite to that of a baseball bat.
Hmm.
Well, he's left-handed and he's holding it wrong, and I'm frustrated because he's not holding it right. And at one point, I heard myself say, "If you're not going to hold it right, then I'm going inside."
Hmm.
Like, I'm not doing this. And he's 5 years old. Like, he doesn't care. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's when I was like, oh, what a jerk I am. He just wants to hit around with me, and I'm having to be his coach in this moment. So it's so easy for us to slip back into these habits.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, so my dad grew up playing hurling and Gaelic football and everything like that. And I think about you, right, being a basketball guy and your sport background, like you didn't play hurling as a kid, and yet, it's almost like this little bit of knowledge. All of a sudden, you become this coach instead of just letting your kid find that comfort on his journey. And it's hard, and your intentions are great, you know but it's,
Mhm.
yeah, it's like, wait, why am I yelling at my, like, I didn't yell at him when he was learning to walk, get back up and what are you doing, why are your legs so weak, like, you
Yeah.
don't do that. You're like, okay, well, of course he's going to fall down when he's learning to walk, but all of a sudden he's learning to hit a hurley, or he's learning to kick a soccer ball, and all of a sudden we're like, what's wrong with you, you're doing it wrong, I gotta fix it. Same thing with like riding a bicycle. You don't berate them when they crash.
Yeah. There's two things I've learned. One, we already know about being a parent, is oftentimes we're tempted to pursue our unfulfilled dreams through our kids, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, man, oh, now I know what I know. Maybe I can help my kids avoid the same mistakes, and they can go further than I even went. And I
Yeah.
played Division 1 at the University of South Carolina, so I've had some success. But
Yeah.
there's that. And I think the other thing that I've learned, and I have to credit Richard Weisbord, who's a Harvard professor in child development, and he taught me this, which was this concept that we often want our kids to be like us in many ways. So I was like super passionate. All I wanted to do was play basketball all day, every day. And then my son's sitting there playing Pokemon, and I'm like, no, would you just go outside and like
Yeah.
get better at sports and work on your game and be
Yeah.
passionate? Like, we want our kids to be just like us in some ways. And that's really not healthy, right? They have to find their own journey. So yeah, it's been fun being a sports parent in a lot of ways. It's been a lot challenging in other ways, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think about this all the time. My kids are almost done with high school now. I have a junior and a senior. And so it's funny. I was doing a parent talk last week, and I'm just like, I started this at the beginning of the journey when my kids were first entering sports. And I was thinking of it as a parent. I'm doing the research and writing books and doing talks. And now I've been through it, right? My daughter played her last high school soccer game the other night. My son's got a
Mm.
year left, and then just thinking about, why did we put him in sports? And I mean, I'm happy I've excuse me, I'm happy I've done this work, because I think it helped me kind of continuously check back in with myself, and be like, wait, well, why are they here? Right. Because it's not to get a scholarship. It's not to do this. Like, if they decide to pursue that, great. Right. But that's
Mhm.
their decision. It's not mine. Like, you can't force your kid to be, you know, a college athlete. It's too hard. Right. If they don't love it, if it's not their journey, they're not going to make it. And so, but I think so many parents, we come from, like you felt like, oh, if I can just help them avoid my mistakes, instead of,
Mhm.
hey, if I can help them find their passion, and then I can support what they're passionate about, then they're far more likely to be good at whatever it is they do, right?
Yeah, and so I think our role as coaches is to help. shine a light and help people become more aware as parents of what's most important. And we got to do that every year. We got to do it every week,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's so many strategies that I get into in my newest book, are just talking about how can we help parents, our athletes, and ourselves to continuously reflect back on what's really important,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that we're all on the same page and we're reinforcing that throughout the season. Because if we don't do that, right, then we're going to have these things that just spiral out of control, and then we get these irate, crazy sports parents, as well as just even really good, well-intentioned parents losing their way a little bit, because it's so tough to navigate. I mean, I'm sure you could speak to it too. You've been in this, you've been studying, you've probably read more on, you know, psychology and sports and all those than probably any parent out there in America. And yet you could still probably say it's not easy, right? It's difficult to navigate that as a
Oh, I've
sports
still
parent. So
screwed up the car ride home. I've still screwed up the post game
exactly.
talk, like whatever, you know. I think I'm getting better at it. I mean, it was funny. My son's team the other day had a poor game, and and he had a poor game, and John O'Sullivan 10 years ago would have just lit into him, maybe how my dad might have lit into me. But I realized in that moment I wasn't in a place to have a productive conversation. And so, he kind of asked me, it was that night, he's like, so any thoughts on the game? And I just said, you know what? How about we just talk about this tomorrow?
Mhm.
Right? Like your emotions, my emotions, everything's going to be better. Right. And the conversation the next day was quick and easy. And, again, when kids don't play well, they, especially when they're older, right? Not the 6-year-old has no self-awareness, but the 16-year-old, they know when they had a bad game. They feel like crap when their team loses 6-0, right?
Mhm.
So what are you going to say? Are you going to make them feel worse? Like you're just trying
Mhm.
to make yourself
Mhm.
feel better.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so how do we help those parents as coaches? I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the great challenges, right?
Well, let's get into the book here. And so I like, sort of your parts of the book. And part one is, again, the change starts within, right? To be a better coach, be a better you, says Joe Ehrman. And I think
Mhm.
that's the truest statement out there. And we're talking about here, we're recognizing how parents are the most influential people in kids' lives. And so if we can be better at us, they're more likely to trust us and engage with us, correct?
Yeah, and I talk a little bit about my high school coach in the book, because if I look at the two most influential men in my life, the number one is my dad, and
Mm-hmm.
number two is my high school coach.
Hmm.
And it wasn't the type of influence that I think any coach wants to have,
Yeah.
because it was all emotionally abusive, and sometimes even crossing physical boundaries of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
That he was removed from coaching. It was kind of around the Bobby Knight era, but shortly after. And, when we started to see administrations holding coaches to at least some sort of standard, right? And so, it's just the impact, so often I think, I hear coaches complain about parents. And then if I look at those coaches, I go, well, I wouldn't be happy either, because the way
Right.
you're treating your athletes is not in a way that's, really probably in line with your own values. Right. And I've had parents, one of the most powerful moments in my life as a coach was when a parent sat me down, a parent that I respected, a parent that had shown interest in me and built a relationship with me. He sat me down and said, man, I see, like, you say these things, you say you value these things, but then I see you on the sideline. I see the way you interact. I hear about what you say in the locker room at halftime. And I just don't know if that, you have your behaviors align with really what you say you value and your mission. And so, I think there is a place for parents to kind of point things out at different points when a coach says one thing, but completely acts not in alignment with that. So the first step in all of this is, yeah, focus on ourselves, make sure that we're not perfect, but we're at least showing that we're working on these things. No coach needs to be perfect. No coach can be perfect,
Right.
but we at least say, hey, I'm working on these things. This is what I value. I'm not perfect, but I'm working on them. They can see that. Then that's really powerful.
Yeah, I 100% agree because, again, I don't even think parents expect us to be perfect, but they do expect us to treat their kids within sort of the same boundaries as the math teacher, right? Like the math teacher wouldn't be choking a kid or for screwing up a problem or making them run or berating them or cursing at them. Like that wouldn't be okay, right? And so, yeah, sometimes it's hard because I mean, the one difference between being a teacher and being a coach is that when, as a coach, the parents get to watch the test every weekend, right? They don't get to watch the math test. They don't get to watch their kids struggle and mess up. They just get to see the score afterwards, right? And so we have that different challenge, and it's emotional and it's public. And so when we lose it, everyone sees it,
Yeah,
and it's hard.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
makes it really tough.
So you say in there, right? Seeing parents as people. What is the word? The word I always come back to with parents and coaches is trust. And this idea that as a coach, you need to make deposits in the trust bank with parents and with your athletes so that you can make withdrawals later. Is that something that resonates with you as well?
Yeah, and I think early on in that relationship, how are we building trust, right? So, I think there's a lot of unique things that we can do. One thing is to really be explicit in communicating what's important so that we're all on the same page, right? So there's that preparing the soil, as Dave Brandt, the former coach at Messiah, now
Yeah.
at Bucknell, talks about. You're going to really, and he's like, I'm going to take my philosophy and I'm going to shove it down their throats,
Yeah.
right? I'm really preaching that. But there's also another component of that, and it's really trying to understand what is important to them.
Yeah.
And you can do that through conversations. You can do that through note cards at your, meetings, the preseason meeting. But you really want to allow them to articulate what's important for them. What
Yeah.
do they want to see, their child's experience to be like? What would their experience? What do they want their experience to be like as a sports parent? One
Yeah.
that does all this work and invests all this money in their career, and in that athlete's, experience. So, it's trying to have those early conversations. That's early on. That's so important.
Yeah. And I think when a parent says, you know, I know JP loves my kid and is in it for my kid, right? He's in it for the right reasons. Something doesn't seem right. I'm far more likely to go to you and be like, look, you've been there for my kid for 5 years. It's not working right now. What are you seeing? What am I seeing? Things like that, right? Versus like skip you. I mean, skip you and go to your AD, or now skip you and go to the principal, or straight to the school board. And there's no chain of command anymore. When
Mhm.
I was growing up, I'm 50, almost 52, and it was like, there's a problem. My dad would be like, go talk to your coach.
Mhm.
Now more often than not, dad goes talk to the school board member, who then goes back to the principal, who then goes to the AD, who then goes to the coach. And for the three people in the school district, it's the first time they've ever heard that there was a problem.
Yeah, and so often, even if they come to you, that conversation is they've been bottled it up, and it's gotten to the point they're the boiling point, right? And they've built up all these things rather than go to you a little bit earlier and maybe clarify some stuff. This is something I really advocate a lot of coaches though do, and every coach, like, yeah, you need to have your hey, I won't talk about this, or the 24-hour rule. That's great, right? Establish some boundaries. But really, what we need to also do is establish some open lines of communication.
Yeah.
So, what are the conversations I want to have? Well, as a coach myself, I want to have a conversation when there's something going on in that kid's life, right? That at home that comes up. Think back to that story I told earlier with that father, right?
Yeah.
That would have been really important information to know that his parents were going through a divorce.
Yeah.
It don't need all the details, but just to know that was going on. Secondly, I want to have conversations if there is, something that's really upsetting their son or their daughter. Like if they really are struggling to want it and don't want to be there, like I want to know that, because if their motivation is down and I'm not aware of that, that's going to be really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if they've seen something in my behavior that doesn't align with my values, right? The amount of times that someone sees something and they say, well, they think less of me, right? But they don't bring it to my attention. And actually, if I just explained what I was doing or why I was doing it, it would have cleared that up. Like
Mm-hmm.
that, there's the amount of times that I've gone and a parent said, well, you did this a year ago or 6 months ago. And I was like, that's not actually what happened. And I
Mm-hmm.
explain it and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. So those type of conversations can be really beneficial.
Yeah. And I think the communication piece as well, like especially with a high school athlete or even a middle school athlete, right? Where you are, and certainly a college athlete, obviously, where it's a coach athlete communication. Um, Having then the wherewithal, if it was an important thing, not just, hey, work on your left foot, but like if it was an important thing, to follow that up with a quick email to the parents, hey, just so I met with Johnny today, and this is what we talked about, because
Mhm.
his behavior at practice or how he's treating his teammates, or, he's constantly fooling around and talking, he's being disruptive. And we had this conversation, and I just wanted you to know, in case you can share any insight with me, um, or if you want to talk about it, because like that moment from the coach, right? And also, like, I've been very intentional. If I see behavior change in a kid, is I'll reach out to the parent, be like, something's up with your son. Is everything okay? And that's when you get that divorce, cancer, whatever. And so, how helping a parent understand, I see your kid, is really important, right? It's a really important sort of step in that trust relationship, so that they come back to you. But then, you cannot, and this is for the coaches who don't have kids, right? Once you have a teenager and you say, how was practice today? It's you, or school today, right? It's a one-word answer. Good. Okay. Sucked. So don't think that they're going to fill mom and dad in on the conversation that you had, right? Or that it's going to be an accurate depiction of the conversation. Oftentimes it's going to be their version of the conversation. And so you heading that off at the pass with parents is a pretty important thing as well, versus coach is benching me. He just hates me, doesn't treat me fairly. And then they getting all of the tizzy, right? And they email you, or they call you, or they pull you over in the parking lot. And you're like, he showed up late 6 days in a row, right? He
Yeah.
punched Joey in practice. Of course he's not playing tomorrow. Oh, he
Yeah.
didn't tell me that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, well, I think the really important thing is, sorry, I got to let my dog out here, John. The really important thing is that, we are continuously supporting the relationships, and we're continuously supporting the kind of culture that we're trying to create, this partnership between parents and the coaches, right? So what you're talking about there is, yeah, we've established these open lines of communication. We've had a great preseason meeting. We've done things to lay out the culture, but now we need to continuously support them. There's a really cool story I heard, and I share in my book, of a dean of students in Chattanooga, Tennessee, named Phil Mansueto. And what he started doing post COVID was transformational for the whole school. He spent, his role was like disciplinarian. Well, he started spending half of his days calling parents. A
Mm,
third of those calls, he made 1,000 calls in 1 year. A third of those calls were positive things,
mm-hmm.
and 2/3 were discipline issues. And sometimes the parent would be on the speakerphone or they'd be called in. But he started to engage them in the discipline process, as well as he'd send a week or a biweekly email out to parents saying, hey, the teachers in the whole school are working on these character skills. They're
Yeah.
trying to develop these skills for life. And so they had a way of reinforcing and celebrating when students did those well. And so that all of a sudden now the relationship changed, because it just wasn't a parent, him calling parents when there was a problem. It was calling when good things were going on too. And so what they saw was over, a 50% reduction in discipline issues, and their parent engagement went up 4 times what it used to be as far as PTOs and engagement in events, as far as attendance. And it's the same for us as coaches. So I know we're like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time for this. Well, simply build it into your schedule. Like, I always advocate for our coaches to be doing consistent one-on-ones with athletes throughout the year, whether
Yeah.
it's, once a month, or, just meeting with a couple athletes, checking in on them. Just remember, every time I talk with an athlete, just follow up with a quick text or a phone call to parent. Just say, hey, thanks for allowing me to coach your son or daughter.
Mm-hmm.
They do this great. I love this about them. We love that positive affirmation for our kids. It's
Mm-hmm.
so good. I mean, my own experience, like as a parent, like it just really resonates, that individual affirmation. So start making the positive calls as well, right? And then you might have to call and say, hey, just need to let you be aware something's come up, this happened, we're working with him. Maybe we want the parent to be an encouraging ear. Maybe we say, just letting you be aware of it, I've got it under control. You could take that approach as well too. But I'd also suggest, like, don't just send out a weekly communication that's just a schedule of games.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the parents what you're working on. If
Mm-hmm.
you're focusing on some message around resiliency or courage or playing without fear, share the message with the parents
Mm-hmm.
so that they can, continue to encourage those skills that you're maybe preaching throughout the season.
I mean, I think that's so important, right? It's not just the basketball coach or the soccer coach or whatever. I'm the human development coach, and that character thing. When I do that, when I share those things with parents, I no one's like, quit wasting their time and get back to the skills, right? Like, I think most parents, that's what they want, right? They didn't put their kid in for that next, especially when they're young. Like, we're very intentional about, and I'm very communicative with these 8, 9-year-olds I coach, is that we're teaching behavior. Can you listen? Can you treat people respectfully? Can you do all these things? Like, that's what we're teaching. And we're just using soccer to do it. But that's what people want, right? They want their kid to be a better person, right? And if they happen to end up being a better basketball player, then that's like a bonus.
Yeah, and if they can hear about how we're being intentional,
Yeah.
that's really, really valuable. The next level to this is if they can feel and actually experience that process. So
Mm-hmm.
just to tell a quick story or two on that, there's a coach at Indiana Wesleyan University, a basketball coach. They're an NAIA school, 3-time national championship team. His name's Greg Tunnell, basketball coach. And he was having a real challenge with one of his players, maybe like 10, 13 years ago. And the player was struggling. He was not responsive to any bit of authority. And so he started to reflect on what he knew about this kid. And he pointed back, man, him and his dad do not talk. There's very adversarial relationship there. They're kind of disconnected. So now this team had for years had a team retreat out in the woods. They go out and adventure, eat great food, share stories. And he's like, what if I just started including the dads? So he started doing a father-son retreat. He's been doing it since then. And
Wow.
it absolutely changed the relationship between not just that son and his father, but loads of fathers and their sons.
Yeah.
What was cool though, and I got to, I was interviewing one of these fathers, and writing this book, was once again, it wasn't just, really cool for them to be a part of the team. And all of a sudden now the dads are more about the team than just the athlete, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
one outcome, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's not, I can support the team now that I know the team. Now that I
Yeah.
know
Not just my
Johnny's
kid
dad.
and my kid's
Yeah.
playing time and my kid's points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm out there playing some games and having dinner with Johnny, Johnny's dad and Johnny, right? So it's not just my son, right? So all these experiences and connections. The second thing is the personal transformation that they were offering their athletes. Some of those fathers needed some of those talks. They needed some of that messaging,
Yeah.
and they built these relationships. And so all of a sudden you hear these stories about, like, the Tanago would hear, like, oh yeah, like one dad shared a story about how he was struggling with alcoholism at the retreat last year. And all of a sudden, another player's father starts to reach out to him because he's struggling with alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's just this connection where you see this support of each other. So you don't have to necessarily run a father-son retreat or mother-daughter retreat or anything like that. But what you can do is start to include them in the experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
we have coaches that I work with, Division I level down to the youth level, that are including parents in a practice every year. And
Mm-hmm.
every year, it's one of the best moments. Go out there, be a part of the practice. The players often run the practice, do some drills, and then they have a meal afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
We're bringing parents into the experience, and they're just reconnecting them. And all of a sudden, now we're helping them to build relationships between each other. Total game changer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely love that. I mean, that's a great. I had like goosebumps as you're telling that story of the basketball coach and inviting the dads on this retreat with their sons, because those intense retreat moments, as like, you strip away all the facades and you get down to those vulnerable moments that oftentimes a dad never shares with their son, or the son never shares with his dad, or, and daughters too. Right. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
you know, of, hey, the way that you're doing this is not helping me, it's hurting me. So yeah, God, 100%, man. Um, so we kind of, without talking about it, this is part two of your book, right? Is establishing this partnership, sharing your philosophy, building the connections and the communication. Part three is strengthening the partnership. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, we touched a little bit on some of the
We-
elements, which is that
yeah.
consistent communication. But the other thing is it's continuing to include them in experiences that help them to regain perspective and feel included.
Hmm.
And so the more we can do this, the better. There's two cool really stories that I'll share here that are great activities for coaches to do.
Hmm.
One is we had a coach around a basketball coach, high school basketball coach, and he every Valentine's Day would have the sons and the mothers get together for a Valentine's Day dinner. And so the sons would dress up, they take their mothers out for dinner, and then they would read a poem. You know, really just finding ways to include them. All right. So just team meals, the more we can do those types of things, like the Valentine's dinner, great events. But I would say probably one of the simplest and most profound things that I actually challenged a couple coaches I had last year on as they were in the playoffs was actually bringing them in the locker room at the end of the game. So in one story, I've got a coach that wins the conference championship. Big night, big amazing moment. I was on a coaching call with him earlier that day. Say, if you win or lose today, ask the parents to come in. They win the game. He asked the parents to come in down to the locker room, and it was just powerful. Like because the parents got to be on the outside of that circle of the team, they got to listen in. They got to experience a little bit of that joy and a bit of that glory, and they got to hear some of that messaging.
Hmm.
And the text that coach got that night and the messages he got at the end of the year were just incredible at how much they valued and appreciated being a part of that experience.
Hmm.
Flip that 2 nights later, I had another coach lose in a really devastating hard loss. Same experience. Goes, ask the parents to come in the locker room. Parents come down. Then he turns to parents after he spoke and he said, "Any parents have anything to say?" And all you had was parents, speaking to their crying children there. It was just like how proud they were and what they admired about their effort. Incredibly powerful moments, right? So sometimes it's the parents that oftentimes need to hear our message, you
Right.
know, it more than anything. And other times it's just really special to bring them into that experience.
Right.
So it's finding moments that we can continuously say, hey, they don't have to be a part of every aspect of our program. But
Hmm.
just like Anson Dorrance does, if a parent comes all the way in town, for a game, hey, join us for the team meal today. Like,
Yeah.
just bring us in. But sometimes we are like, oh, this is like we have some secret things going on here that we can't have parents find out about. Or if they join us for a team meal, they're going to absolutely poison the waters. But here you've got coaches like Anson Dorrance, 21 national championships, and he still feels like it's important to include parents in the experience, right? Because as he says, I owe them. I owe them for the work they've done to help to support their child into becoming the soccer player that they are today and the person they are today.
Hmm. And that insight into the culture, right? That insight into, this is how we do things here. That insight into, this is how we approach it after a bad game, right? Like I remember Bill Beswick, the sports psychologist, telling me, when he was coaching 9-year-old rugby, he would invite all the parents over after the game and just be like, to listen to the post game talk. He's like, I was setting them up for what they were going to talk about in the car. Right. Like I
Mhm.
was given some, we're going to work on this in practice, but what were the positives? What can we take out of this? The kids are smiling. They're okay now, even though they lost. He goes, I was trying to make it hard for that dad to get in the car and berate his kid, after listening to what I'm saying to the kid. And I think this is like, this is what we're doing. And this sort of bleeds into part four of your book, which is enforcing the culture. So you have to teach them what the culture is and then make them partners in upholding the standards that we've set, correct?
Yeah, one of the sly and funny ways I've even seen a coach do this last year is they had the parents meeting, and we like to co-create standards with parents. Like, how do we want to be as parents to support our sons? And actually had the parents get together and share this. So they kind of co-created some standards for parents in the stands that year. And every parent email, he'd include the standards there, and there'd be things you'd imagine that parents would come up with, encourage the team, don't discourage players or yell at referees, stuff like that. But then every game, this coach would actually give a big bag of Tootsie Pops to one parent. He'd rotate the parent. And if a parent started getting on referees or starting to go a little negative, it'd be like, oh, here's your Tootsie Pop. And he'd hand it over there so you can suck on the Tootsie Pop and keep your mouth shut. But it was just a fun way to get parents to sit together and to kind of encourage each other on the right behaviors. Because at the end of the day, it's difficult for us as coaches to go in and like force the standards of what happens in the stands, right? And so if we can start to get parents, in a safe way of like, hey, let's make it about each other. Let's just, have some jokes or some fun ways of just kind of redirecting people. That's probably one of the first initial ways to reinforce and enforce that culture.
Yeah. Amen. And I think when parents understand that culture and understand the standards, understand this is what's okay and this is what's not, then they can be helpful with it as well, or at least be like, hey, I know my kid has, I know my kid's been late to practice a couple times, but, I had to take a second job and I'm running late. It's not his fault. Like, that's a different thing than kid was just futzing around and that's why he's late,
Yeah. And if you can start to create, community within the parent groups, all of a sudden now you have people helping each other out in those situations too, like you speak of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if certain players are struggling, you got certain people reaching out. We got some beautiful stories where, parents going through a tough time in one athlete, other families know about it. Everyone starts to give out a helping hand,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like, hey, we're all in this together. That
Mm-hmm.
sense of community, we all know it. It's kind of being lost in society.
Mm-hmm.
And sports can be this new community that probably was, 50 years ago in the small towns and different, parts of suburbs or even the city, like just that was more around the school or that they may be playing that sport for. And I think what you're seeing is because of the club sports and single sports and players transferring and all this stuff there, and just of the way the world is working today and all the complexity is we're losing that sense of community. If we want to reestablish that, like our team can be that for so many kids and their parents.
Mm-hmm.
If we can, but we have to work to intentionally create that type of culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think this is the most important thing, right? Is like, if we're all aligned in what is the purpose of this, and hopefully a higher purpose than just winning this season, right? So what's the purpose? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? We're all aligned in this. We're not going to agree every day. We're going to see things a little differently once in a while. I'm the soccer coach. I have 16 players. Your kid gets 1/16 of my attention and they get 16/16 of your attention. You're going to see things that I don't. Some of them might be very helpful to bring to my attention and some might not. Right. But,
Mhm.
it's just amazing how often, I like think of personal stories of like kids that at the end of practice, they're smiling. I give them a high five. They sit in the car and they burst into tears. Now, there's no possible way for me to know that unless the parent informs me,
Mhm.
right? And 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 if there's a problem because someone is picking on them or bullying them or whatever, I can't solve that unless I know there's a problem, right?
Mhm.
And it's just all these things are just like, it's just such a funny thing. If we're partners in this, you're going to let me know. I'm going to solve your problem. If you let it build up and then boil over and berate me because your kid hates soccer and wants to quit, like, man, I where was my opportunity to do anything on your behalf? Because I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a really cool story. I don't go into this much detail in the book on it, but it's where we had one school, we were working really hard, engaging the parents and doing a lot of the strategies that I share in there. And they got to this point where they're so connected as parents. The parents had started to organize a post Friday night game get together. They'd always go out to a restaurant, have a few drinks, have some fun. But there was a bet early in the year. So one of the seniors, who was a starter, but not a big scorer in basketball, the bet was if he scored, then his dad had to do shots for every point he had. And
Oh
so
my
that
God.
was always, so in the middle of a game, if he scored, the place would just go absolutely mental. And the coach did not know this until the end of the year. And then he learned about it. He's like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I mean, I know we were happy for this so-and-so, but it was like, oh, they'd be really, giving that parent a hard time. But how funny is that? Like now parents are like, that parent isn't embarrassed by the fact that his son's not a high scorer, and
Yeah.
they have a joke around it and they have camaraderie around it. I mean, that's special, right? And those parents will remember that experience of that team that, went all the way to the state championship that year. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, and again, there's so many other ways to get parents engaged. I mean, there's, these groups I wrote about in my last book, that attach the number of passes to charitable contributions, right? So you can say, hey, we're going to learn to play the game right. For every point we score, we're going to, all the parents agree to donate, 10 cents to breast cancer or whatever. And now kids like,
Mhm.
how much money did we raise today versus how much did we win? And that's the only thing that matters. I mean, I think things like that are just awesome. And it just picks up, it just takes it to the next level.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other final thoughts? I mean, I think one of the things that you recommend, which I think as well, is this idea of getting a coach or a mentor. Like, I think so many coaches feel like they're in a silo and they don't know who to turn to or ask advice from. And yes, you can, work with someone like you, which is awesome. But I mean, every athletic department, every club also has other amazing coaches in it that you can just have a coach's coffee once a week and talk about these things that you're working through. So talk about the importance of that and how you've seen that change people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from my own experience, I had a lot of blind spots. I mean, we all have them. And so what you really want to find if you find a mentor or you're looking for a coach is someone that can help you to take different perspective. And sometimes that's different perspective on a problem that you're looking at, you know, to do the Steven Spielberg shift, right? Oh, let's look at the problem completely different, right? Um, so there's that shift. And also just the shift in perspective around, maybe highlighting some areas where you're really not, or some blind spots where you're kind of falling short in your leadership. And that was the power for me back in 2016 was working with a coach, mentor that helped me to realize some of the ways that I was approaching it were not very effective. One story on that is like I remember reading the Maffini Manifesto, which is this article that this Major League Baseball player writes for the parents of the team that he coaches. And I was like, man, I love that. I'm going to write that for my parents. And so I kind of like inspired by that, write this manifesto, like, this is your job, stay in your lane, and there's so much truth to his manifesto, but there's also a tone to it that's just like, I'm the coach, you're the parent, and I really don't want to have to deal with you kind of like tone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember bringing that to my mentor and I'm just like, what do you think of this? How can I make this better? And he's like, well, if you were a parent and you read that, how would you feel? And I went
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not included, not one in this program.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just so like shifts like that, it's just so often we don't have that with people in our own club or our own team, like our assistant coaches, you know, even the best cultures that we can create with our staff, they're still going to struggle to speak up at times and kind of call us out on certain behaviors. So we need to have people that can speak truth to, speak truth in a way that we can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So by having someone that's kind of emotionally detached from, the team and what's going on there, from the results, and just is in your corner and is aligned with what your mission is in coaching, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And that outside voice who can like somewhat unemotionally, right? They care about you, but they're a little less emotional because they're not part of the day to day like you are, just to say, have you thought of it this way? Right. Is a
Mhm.
really, I think, important and powerful thing sometimes as well. So it's awesome, man. Any other final thoughts? I mean, I'd love, you have these, in your conclusion, these challenges, and just the first one, right? This idea, hold compassion for parents. I mean, I think any team, any coach athlete relationship, coach parent relationship, teammate to teammate relationship, the more compassion you can hold for other people, that they're on a journey that you don't understand. I mean, that's the key to, I think, any type of great situation.
Yeah, I think we touched a lot on that theme of compassion early on, is remembering how difficult it is. What I think we also need is compassion with challenge. And I also, talk about that in the book about how to engage parents in hard conversations and, framework for that. But, one thing I'd really, I guess, want to leave people with is that what does compassion and challenge look like, or that challenge aspect of it? And I think this really comes down to coaches and administrators, because I know a lot of administrators also listen to your podcast, is that before we get into the season, coaches and administrators need to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to approach parents? What's our proactive approach, upstream approach to build relationships, these partnerships? But also, how are we going to address issues when they come in? And it could be the different for every coach. Like some athletic directors might say, the coach wants the athletic director to shield them from the complaints. The other one might want them to bring the complaints to them, right? There's different ways, that you can go about that, but there needs to be a agreed upon approach. And where is the administrator is going to have that coach's back? And where are we at moments that, this is what you're responsible for as far as your own behaviors. You do these types of things, and we're not going to have your back on that because that's not meeting our standards. But having those conversations beforehand so that you can hold parents accountable and challenge them. Because here's what we're not doing. The irate parent and the fans that's berating the referees or talking negatively about the coach or saying stuff to the players, we don't have coaches or administrators that are pulling them aside in an unemotional moment and saying, hey, that's not helpful, and giving them that feedback. We don't have that often. And there needs to be feedback and support and truth spoken. And eventually there needs to be, and I really believe this, administrators that step in and say, listen, you're now like if a coach, like here's a few examples. Parent texts or emails a coach berating the coach. All right, you no longer have the opportunity to sit down with me or the administrators. You've lost that opportunity because the way you spoke to us. So there's setting boundaries there. I've seen a few athletic directors actually say, you've lost the opportunity to attend your son or daughter's games because of the way you behaved at the game, or the message that you sent, or the email that you sent to that parent.
Yeah.
Because what we're seeing is when administrators don't do that level of boundaries and enforcement around those types of standards, we're seeing coaches being bullied.
Right.
We're seeing coaches run out of town. You and I know our friend Nate Sanderson, and I tell the story, and Nate's been on your podcast before to talk about parents. I mean, as intentional as a coach as they come, but you get a group of parents that want they're not happy, and they go to the AD, and the AD appeases them and gives into their complaints and feeds that narrative. And all of a sudden you have a massive problem on your hands. And so we need administrators and coaches that are going to speak truth in a way that these parents can hear it, or best chance that they'll hear it. But also we need to enforce some boundaries and consequences. And I know we don't want it to hurt the kid, but at the end of the day, we have a duty and a responsibility to the team and to the community to make sure that whatever environment they're playing in is safe and healthy.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's important to elaborate on that as a coach, especially in a school environment or a club environment, right? Older kids where sometimes playing time is, whatever. It's a varsity team like Nate coached or whatever. Like, what are the standards? What are the things? Like, as a coach, I need to know if I do these things, you have my back as the AD, right? You can't cut my legs out from under me if I say the standard is if you miss practice the day before a game, you don't start, or you sit out a half or whatever. And then that parent complains. Whereas, you have to be like, sorry, that's the standard. You can't waffle on that, right? You can't, have parents coming in saying, this is the offense we should be playing. This is the defense we should be playing. This is the players who should be playing. Like, that's not an okay conversation to have, because it's not your place. And I need, and I think what happens when administrators and coaches get on the same page, and then when that poor behavior is immediately dealt with and parents realize, oh, there's no way in here, then they usually back off. Right. And again, it's not, but when you open the door crack for inappropriate things, they come pouring through.
Yeah. And this is where, like you said, these types of things will creep up and the parents will test the waters. Hey, well, my son's a senior. He should play. So there's a really powerful story of a young head coach that I worked with. He's about 27, just got a head varsity job in New Jersey. There's two twins on the team. They're seniors. And the parent calls a meeting with the principal, the athletic director, and the coach. And he's sitting down, this young 27-year-old coach. And we prepared and we prepped for this, but he sits down, he does three really important things. He first sat down and just said, hey, tell me what's going on and what your concern is. And the father goes off and says, well, really the issue was one of the twins was not playing. But then he goes on to say, well, I don't like all this, community service you're having the team do, and you're reading books and you're talking about this. Like your job is to win. And right now we're 0-3. And, like this is an embarrassment and you're an embarrassment and you're a joke. And this coach listens, asks questions, and repeats back and says, so this is what I'm hearing. Your issues are okay. Yeah. Okay. Then it's the second thing is he just shares his perspective. He says, well, this is what I'm observing. Your sons are late. Your son's not working hard here. And these are also my assessments, right? I could be wrong, but this is why I think these are the best players, right? And your son's not in that category, to be playing that much. And then he says, the last thing is just, we're not going to change the playing time of your son. So what can we do right now to support your son moving forward? Because that's not going to change, but I can, if there's something I'm not doing to support your son in that role, I'm happy to do that. So he does that third step. And you know what? I wish there was a great, magical story to this, but the reality was that parent wasn't happy.
Yeah.
They said, well, we're going to have to evaluate whether we want to stay here or not. They played 2 more games and dad pulled them off the team.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the team went on a 8-4 win streak.
Yeah.
The culture was better off and the standard was clear. And everyone knew this new coach was not going to just play you just because you were a senior. So
or because your dad made a stink, or
exactly, right?
or because your dad donates a lot of money to the school or whatever it is. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we need coaches with that courage, and we need administrators with that courage to say, I heard you, I've listened, but I'm going back to my principles and what we really are about here. And we're not going to bend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good for you helping that coach through a tough conversation, because I know at 27, I wouldn't be totally equipped to deal with it like maybe I am at 52. So awesome. JP, tell people how to get the book and all that sort of stuff, so they can grab it. Its release date is November 21st, 2023. Tell them where they can grab it.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. It'll be on paperback, ebook, and then it'll be on Audible as well. If you want to also look at bulk orders and stuff, you can go to tocculture.com, and there'll be a link there on the main homepage to pick up the book as well too.
Awesome. Well, listen, thanks for the great conversation. The hour flew by. I really enjoyed it. And this is a great book. I can't say enough. I think coaches who are intentional about parent engagement will have better experiences, better team culture. They'll enjoy coaching more. They'll still have issues, but those issues will be smaller and more likely to be dealt with. This is one of the most important things to be intentional about today, and understanding where parents are coming from, why they're scared, and what are the solutions is great. And this is, one of the best books I've ever read, really written for the coach to deal with this. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and appreciate you and throughout the years here. I would not be doing the work I am doing today if it wasn't for the conversations that we had, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where you continue to encourage me. So I appreciate you.
For all those who attend our conferences, JP was at the first one ever in Boulder. I think there was 50 of us there. So yeah, awesome, man. Thanks so much for being on The Way of Champions. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks again to JP Nerbun for the great conversation today about his brand new book, The Sports Parent Solution: Proven Strategies for Transforming Parents from Obstacles to Allies. It's an awesome book. I don't really think there's been ones sports parenting books per se, really directed at coaches of how to engage parents. And he really just breaks it down in such a simple way of ourselves and our philosophy and the connection, and then upholding the standard and culture. Such a good book. So yeah, you can get that on Amazon. He's got an audio book, he's got a paperback, and all that sort of stuff. It's an excellent book. As a coach, you'll get a lot of great ideas out of this as well. Okay. Thanks to our friends, all of our supporters at Patreon. If you want to become a supporter of us, probably the best way to start is just go to changethegameproject.com, sign up for the Wednesday Wisdom newsletter. And that way you get the new blogs and new podcasts in your inbox. We try not to spam you too much, but we also throw coupons out and stuff to get courses or books or things like that at discount. And again, please get those bulk book orders in here soon, so that if you want them before the holidays, we can get them to you. Okay. Remember, everyone, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, make a difference, make an intentional difference this week to engage the parents on your team, to engage the parents of your athletes. And we'll see you again next week.